All right, today we're going to talk about, continue talking about what happened between the world wars. We're specifically going to talk about hard economic times and how that led to fascist dictators, the rise of fascist dictators. It all starts with something called the Great Depression. And this is basically where the world economy started to go downhill. And the reason for this is that World War I was extremely expensive. There was a lot of money borrowed, specifically from the U.S., to pay for the war. France and Britain was borrowing money for getting supplies, getting weapons, and all the Allies were. And they needed to repay them. Well, the Treaty of Versailles said that Germany had to repay France and Britain. And all of this money that was owed was not being repaid. And so basically the stock market is going to crash. People are going to stop investing in businesses. They're going to stop investing, and this is going to cause banks and businesses to close in what's called Black Tuesday. Now, this sort of changed the tides. In the 20s, you had the Roaring 20s. You had this time period of huge economic success, followed very quickly by an economic failure. And during this time of the Great Depression, you had about 25% of the people were unemployed, which caused a lot of poverty as well. And after the Great Depression, this was so bad that they actually created the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to try to prevent this from happening in the future. But the Great Depression was so bad that it led to the rise of fascism. Fascism is basically when a dictator has control over the country. A fascist leader will often use nationalism to get the people's loyalty, often by going to war to promote that nationalism. And they also promote the idea that the state is more important than the individual, and that the individual people should sort of submit to the state, should give up what they want for what the state needs. Now, there are three main fascist countries. The first one is Italy. Now, Italy was under the control of King Victor Emmanuel. It was a constitutional monarchy. But the Great Depression hurt the economy so bad that they needed a change. Okay? They needed some big changes. They also felt like they did not benefit from the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles punished the Central Powers, but they were only repaying France and Britain. They weren't paying Italy, which fought with the Allies. And the king wasn't really doing anything to help them. So a newspaper editor named Benito Mussolini starts to rise to power. He initially gets made to be prime minister, which means he's pretty much in charge of everything. But then after being prime minister for a little while, he kicks the king out of power completely and becomes a fascist dictator of Italy. In Germany initially was under the control of the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was a government that was put in power by the Treaty of Versailles. They'd thrown all the people out from World War I, and they put a new government in. But you have kind of the same things. The Great Depression hurt the economy. The Treaty of Versailles was making Germany pay back their debts, or pay for World War I. And so the Weimar Republic isn't really doing anything about this to help Germany out. They're suffering greatly. And so Adolf Hitler is going to rise to power through the Nazi Party. Nazis were a socialist party, but not to the extent that it was in Russia. Now, he wrote a book called Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle, and he basically was explaining what he wanted Germany to do. He blamed the Treaty of Versailles and Jews for the economic problems that were happening in Germany. And his solution was to take over all of Europe in North Africa, to take over all the territory that Rome had once controlled, so that you can control resources, you control trade, things like that. And he would have called this the Third Reich, the Third Rome. And the people of Germany, even though a lot of people disagreed with with Hitler's ideas, a lot of them thought that Hitler was kind of the only hope to actually having a successful and prosperous Germany. And so we'll talk more about Hitler and Mussolini when we get to World War II. The last fascist government is in Spain. A guy named Francisco Franco threatened Spain's democratically elected government, and basically a civil war breaks out. And Francisco Franco is trying to take over, but he's not strong enough. So Hitler and Mussolini come in and actually help him take over. And this is basically really kind of their training ground for World War II, is the Civil War, and when they were actually fighting in it. It was sort of their training ground to improve their military for when they were going to start trying to take over all of Europe. So that is the Great Depression and fascism.